Hello everyone. I'm pretty sure we're live now. So welcome to the Class 26 question and answer webinar. You guys actually get to see me live, a preview of meeting me in person in 3 weeks. So really this will, I've set it for an hour. I don't think it will go that long, but I've set aside a whole hour, so you can ask any questions that you have. If you go on the YouTube page, you should see something called a live chat on the right-hand side that I just typed hello into, and that's where you can type your questions. So unfortunately, it's not as interactive as if I can hear you guys saying the questions, but hopefully this will do. So yeah, with that, I'll just wait for questions. I will say, if you could try to make these questions more general that would be beneficial to the whole group. More individualized questions about specific circumstances or things like that are better asked to me in an email. So yeah, whoever wants to go ahead and type a question. Okay, so Sarah asked, when do you think we'll get the answers regarding housing? So if you're a DC fellow who filled out the housing, DC housing questionnaire, I'm hoping to make those matches today or tomorrow. I kind of have to just look at all the responses, and it can take a little bit of time to match everyone's preferences, what we have available, and what fits everyone best. But that's on my to-do list for today or tomorrow at the latest to email that out. And then Emmy and Nazreen said, hello guys, hope you guys are doing well. And then Emmy, so I'm going to respond to that email soon about housing in Redmond, Washington. We actually haven't had fellows there before, so there's no one I can connect you with, but I'm happy to schedule a Skype call with you. So look out for an email about that pretty soon. And we can kind of just walk through things together. Okay, any other questions about orientation or flights or anything like that? So Nazreen asks if we can secure an Atlas Core house for 1 month or less till we find another house. So the way that our subleases normally work is that the subleases are for 4 months. So from like September 15th to January 15th, or January 15th to May 15th. Now that we are welcoming 6 classes a year, so kind of a class every 2 months, we're open to starting out leases for 2 months. But again, we're giving preference to fellows who can sign on for 4 months, since that's a better deal for us. But if you had filled out the sheet and I end up matching you an Atlas Core house, then we can discuss if 2 months is possible. I can't guarantee it, but it is potentially possible. And then Emmy asked, what if I don't get the permit? For how long will I agree to catch the fellowship? So So in terms of our Palestinian fellows that are still waiting on permits, I was actually going to send out an email pretty soon, but essentially we are willing to bring you here whenever you get the permit, whenever you're able to get the visa interview. I'll send an email with what kind of an off-cycle orientation would look like. But we know that there have been some delays and some complications with our Gazan participants especially. So basically, we're willing to bring you here as soon as you get the visa. And then Sarah says, I saw that there were actually different Atlas Corps apartment locations. Do you think they will be chosen according to what's best for us? So in the housing questionnaire, I did ask what your, what your preferences were in terms of, if you'd be willing to live, what factor was most important to you in terms of location or cost or anything else. I will say that I do really try to make sure that your commute wouldn't be super long. So I do definitely take location into account, but since there are a lot of you, I do have to take a lot of things into account, such as location, but also diversity of the houses. For instance, if there's a house that already has 3 males, normally they would want another male instead of a female, although that's not always the case. So there are a lot of factors, but I do take location into account. And then Ingrid is asking a question about baggage allowance. So yes, if basically we guarantee that we will reimburse up to 2 checked baggages if the second bag isn't already included. We do not book for we do not pay for overweight luggage fees. So we'll pay up to 2 checked luggages. You can buy it on the spot. Just make sure that you bring your receipt so that then we can reimburse it during a session in orientation. So Ara is asking if the fellow is not lucky to get a room for ride to the US, what can be done? So if you are a DC fellow, we can guarantee you housing through the end of Global Leadership Lab, and we can work with you during orientation and Global Leadership Lab to look for housing. If you are serving outside of the DC, remember you get the $350 relocation. We'll reimburse up to $350 for temporary housing that you find in your host city, and that will give you time on the ground when you're actually in the city to look for housing. More permanent housing, I mean. If you're in the hostel, we pay for the hostel, so that is money that you will save because you won't have to be immediately paying rent. And then right before you leave, you will get your full October stipend, and of course, a lot of that should be dedicated to housing too. So there are a lot of sources of funding, and there are also there are sessions during what we call housing office hours, where you can sit down with me or my colleague Samantha, and we can help you look for housing as well. And as always, before you arrive, I'm happy to look at any crisis ads that you want to send over and answer any questions. And so the lease for Atlas Corps housing is generally 4 months, although we're potentially open to having 2-month leases, although those who can do 4 months are obviously higher up on the preference list. And then Ingrid is asking about the flight from DC to her host city in San Francisco. So yes, Atlas Corps does book your transit from DC to your host city. So if it's in San Francisco, it'll be a flight. If it's in New York, the cheapest option is usually a bus. But by then you'll actually have met a lot of other fellows from that city during Global Leadership Lab, and you'll probably all end up going, or a big number of you will end up going back together. But yeah, no need to worry about booking that travel yourself. Atlas Corps manages the travel from DC to your host city. Okay. Okay, any other questions? So Sarah asked, how much do you think, according to my experience, will we be spending on transportation monthly in DC? So that's a good question. I would budget around $100 to $200 a month for transportation in DC. Let me actually do a really quick, calculation. So more like 100 to 150 if you're taking the metro every day, and that's probably the higher end. So in DC, 100 to 150 per month for transportation. And of course, that's using the metro or buses. So Emmy asked if there's any instruction that we need to follow if we want to travel internationally during our fellowship. So basically, if you want to travel internationally during your fellowship, as long as your visa is valid through the time, all of your visas are at least, I'm pretty sure, valid through September 9th or so, or I guess September 3rd or 4th or so of 2018. So as long as you, as long as your visa is valid for when you get back, and it's a multi-entry visa, and your DS-2019 is signed in a specific place, which we'll sign when you all get here, then you can travel internationally without a problem. And then Ara's asking if the Metro card is valid for all lines. Yes, basically, when you all arrive, even if you're not serving in DC, you'll receive a welcome bag, and in that welcome bag there will be a preloaded Metro card. So obviously that's useful for all of you serving in the DC area, but also good for fellows when they come back for future global leadership labs, to have that Metro card. And the Metro card is valid for all of the lines: orange, silver, blue, green, yellow, and red. There's no separate card for separate lines. So Alina, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, is asking about the local ambassadors. So I know my colleague Samantha has been hard at work making those matches, and I'm pretty sure that she will be connecting you with local ambassadors early this week, if not by the end of the week. And I know a lot of people are a little worried about housing. The search can seem kind of daunting. I do just want to say that most fellows, most satellite fellows especially, don't actually end up getting permanent housing until they're actually in the United States. It's just much easier to find housing once you are actually on the ground. So it's amazing if you're able to find permanent housing in your city before you arrive, but just know that that's not super common. So don't get too worried if you're not able to do that yet, before you arrive, because we will help you during orientation and Global Leadership Lab. And at the very least, we'll make sure you have somewhere temporary to be when you first arrive in your city. So then Ingrid is asking, during the first 2 weeks in DC, are the fellows on their own responsible for food? So essentially, during the first 2 weeks, Atlas Corps covers all of your food, breakfast, lunch, and there's some dinners that are included. So you will receive some cash, depending on when you arrive. It varies on the amount. You'll receive some cash to cover food before orientation starts, but then after orientation starts, since we will have set up your bank accounts and deposited your first half stipend into your account, then any meals that aren't covered by Atlas Corps should be covered by that stipend, if that makes sense. So Sarah asked, since we'll be receiving half the stipend for the first month, what would be the best way to budget the basic costs, rent, phone, transportation card? So because you're receiving half a stipend for the first month, if you're in Atlas Corps housing, you'll only be charged half a month's rent. So, I would say you can try to look at I would really just try to divide things by 2. Also knowing that you would probably actually have a little more left over, since like I said, we do cover lots of your food during those first 2 weeks. So that's money that you're not, you're not paying up front. So in terms of a breakdown, I think it'd be easier to answer that if you sent me an email, and I can kind of look more closely at the numbers instead of doing it right off the top of my head, since I want to be as accurate as I can. So Ingrid is asking, is the half stipend of the first month calculated for the month of September? Yes, the half stipend is for September. So you'll receive half a stipend based off the September amount. I will, let me make a note to myself to email out what the September September stipend amounts are. I will say that every month after, or every February, June, and October, the stipends actually increase 1%. So all of you will notice that in October, your baseline stipend amount will actually be higher. So we do that to try to make sure that we're keeping in line or with inflation, making sure we're kind of ahead of inflation. So most of your stipends will actually go up $15 in October, and then $15 in February and June, and so on. So are you going to cover the cost of a residence until we settle down after leaving DC for satellite fellows? So like I said, we reimburse up to $350 for temporary housing that you find, and that's meant to give you some time to at least settle down initially as you search for more permanent housing. And again, besides the $350, if you're a satellite fellow staying in the hostel during orientation, you won't be paying for lodging during those first 2 weeks, so you can save a lot of money. And then a big chunk of your first full month stipend can also go towards housing as well. So Arwa, are there any restrictions for electronic devices when traveling to the US? So that really depends on on the airline, and I think that would be better directed at, that'd be a question better directed to our travel agent once he is connected to you via email, because he'll be able to speak to the specifics of each airline. And then Arwa also asked, are we able to set up a bank account with a credit card under the J-1 visa? I will say that I don't have a lot of experience with fellows doing this. I've never really looked at that too closely, but I'm pretty sure that is possible. I think that I also don't want to give any inaccurate information. I don't think it has any tax implications, but I think we should look into that once you arrive. And then Sarah asks, if we receive housing at Atlas Corps Apartments, will the full rent be withdrawn? No. So if you receive housing at Atlas Corps Apartments, since you're moving in the middle of the month, we will only withhold half a month's rent. So let's say the full month's rent is $800. We'll only take out $400. I do want to just reiterate that I'm happy to set up individual Skype calls with anyone that's concerned about housing, and we can kind of search through things together. So if that's the case, just let me know, give me an email, shoot me a quick email, and I'll be more than happy to kind of set up a quick Skype call to help you look more personally. Okay, so any other questions? So Sarah asked if the return ticket will be rescheduled. So yes, let me explain this a little bit more because it can be confusing. So essentially, when we book your flights, a return ticket is almost always the cheapest option. So we will originally book a round trip ticket, but airline policy dictates that we can't book the return date for a year after you arrive when we originally book it. So you'll see that on your ticket, the return date will probably be 8 months after you arrived. About a month before the return date on your original ticket, we actually will reach out to you, since by then we'll be able to reschedule the ticket for September 2018. So basically at this point, don't worry about the return date. We will end up rebooking it later on. So Sarah says that she saw that hers was on July. So don't worry too much about the actual date of the return. Okay, great. So Sarah said she's got it. Okay. And then Arwa says, do we have to buy phones but in the US? So that's a great question. It will be in some pre-arrival instructions I send pretty soon, but essentially we do recommend that when you guys first arrive, you go and set up your phones at a T-Mobile. Since we do have a pretty packed schedule of orientation and Global Leadership Lab, it's advised that you set up your phone account before orientation starts, although there will be sometimes during orientation where you guys could go and set them up. I will send out an email with the closest T-Mobile to the Atlas Corps office where orientation will be held, and usually a lot of fellows go together and kind of just set them up together. So Emmy asks, what if we want to make a tour of the US or any other country after finishing our fellowship? So that's kind of so going back to some airline policy restrictions, basically we can't end up rebooking your return flight for more than a year minus a day that you arrived. So again, that's airline policy. So many of you are going to be arriving on September 9th, 2017. And so that means that when we are finally able to rebook your return date, the latest possible date we'll be able to rebook it for is September 8th, 2018. Now this does get a little complicated because technically with a J1 visa and your DS 2019, you're allowed 30 days after your end date to stay in the United States. So legally, you can stay in the United States up through, I think for most of you, your end date is September 4th or so, 2018. So you could technically stay in the United States through October 3rd, 2018. But because we can only rebook most of your flights for around September 8th, 2018, if you want to leave after that date, it would be at your own expense. So essentially there isn't a ton of time after the end date of your DS 2019 that you can do a tour of the US, unfortunately, unless you are willing to pay for your return flight home if it falls, you know, outside of the last date, then we can actually book it given airline policy. And I know that's really confusing, but we'll explain a little bit more during orientation, kind of draw things out so that it makes more sense. But yeah, essentially there's not a ton of time to travel to the US after, given those restrictions. So Sarah's asking if we put in contact with our country's embassies in the US. We often try to connect you with the embassies before you go to your visa interview, although sometimes they don't respond to us, and we are trying to get better at that. So when you arrive to the US, connecting with the embassies isn't something that we normally do, although I think that we'd be open to considering it and trying to implement that as part of our process when you arrive. So then Arwa asked, do we need to prepare for an interview with the US Customs? Honestly, I think that it would be super, super quick since you already have your visas and that's already been approved. It's probably just a matter of, you know, kind of stamping your visa in your passport that you actually arrive to the port of entry. Okay, so any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna just give 2 more minutes since I'm not seeing a lot of questions right now. So just feel free to type any more questions and then I'll probably cut it off pretty soon since I'm not seeing any new ones. And of course, you can always email me any and all questions you have. I do encourage you to send, if you do have questions outside of this, to send me a separate email. Please don't respond to an email I send to everyone because it can get, on my end, it can get a little confusing in terms of did I actually end up responding. So if you just create a new email chain, and if you are really organized about the questions you ask, if you like number them, just because I'm dealing with a lot of questions, and you know, in the run up to all of your arrivals, so making the questions as clear and as organized as possible, even just a list of them numbered will make my life a lot easier, and hopefully we'll be able to give you information more quickly. So, and then R was asking when will we know if the contract will be extended for an additional 6 months. So that is a conversation, well, as you all know, you know, we are a certified 18-month program. So to begin with, all of your programs are for the most part 12 months, and then can extend for another 2, 4, or 6 months, so in 2-month increments. The question of extension, it usually has to be decided around month 8 of your fellowship, and that is actually a process that is dealt with our partnerships team. So for you guys, I think that'll be around the end of May 2018 is when we, you know, we have to, the host organizations need to let us know if they want to extend you. I will say extensions, you know, a fair number of fellows do extend, but It's not guaranteed, especially because there is obviously a financial implication with the host organization where they're paying for an extra 2, 4, or 6 months. You know, that's something that you can talk about with current fellows when you get here. There is a guide for kind of how to go about the conversation about extending if you're interested in doing that. But I would wait until you're pretty well settled and, you know, have a good rapport with your supervisor and are very well integrated before asking about that. Okay, so I think I'm gonna wait for at least 2 more questions and then probably cut it off. So Ingrid asks if the host organization is aware that we won't have permanent accommodations when we will start the fellowship, and if they are somewhat flexible to give us some time off to check for apartments. So a lot of the host organizations do know this, and we've told them that if they could be flexible so that you could check for appointments, check for apartments, that would be great. And we found that a lot of them are very accommodating in that regard. Okay, so I'm not seeing any more questions, so I think I'm actually gonna cut it off now. So thanks everyone for all of the really important, useful questions you all asked today. Like I said, if you do have any other questions, please email me separately. And a separate email, number of the questions, everything like that, and I'll be sure to respond to you as soon as I can. So in the meantime, let me know how everything's going. Any questions you have, I'm here as always. So thanks again. I'll be sure to share this entire webinar recording with you all. And yeah, thank you so much.